I'm not much of one. Maybe you would be happier if I was, because this is somewhat, at least the start is a little bit depressing, but it picks up. The idea is to relate some of the themes of local production and local food to overall global issues, serious overall global issues, which is where the depression comes in. But local does provide, I think, some kinds of answers to that. Hence the title, Think Global, Eat Local. And the idea, the notion that eating is a revolutionary act. What I mean by that is actually the food you choose, where it comes from, what happens to it, can actually change the significance. My background, my name is Woodward. My background is in organic research and development. I co-founded and ran the Organic Research Centre in Hampstead Marshall for 30 plus years. I'm now involved with a number of projects, including one here called Beyond GM. And we can talk about genetic engineering if you want to, but I don't intend to go into a great deal of detail about that. The reason we call our campaign Beyond GM is to try and move beyond the idea that solutions to major global problems are silver bullets or about technology. They're not. They're about values, they're about the whole of society, how society, civilization works within the environment. There is no technological silver bullet to any of these big problems. So we're trying, with the words Beyond GM, to lift the debate from mere technology to something else. So, in all of our life, whether it's food, whether it's consumer goods, kitchen buildings, kitchen things, cars, whatever, we live our life on this planet as if we have at least 8 planets. All the world aspires to a lifestyle set by the United States, the advertising, the celebrity, the film culture that comes from the United States. We overuse consumption. Our consumption is too much for the resources of our planet because we don't have 8 planets, we only have 1. And that one is under threat. And I've chosen this slide because, just as a reminder, that this one planet that we have is life on this planet is sustained basically by 2 very fragile things. One is a very thin layer of fertile soil, and the other is the atmosphere, which is also very thin. And within that, we have water and other resources, all of which are fragile, all of which are diminishing, and some of which we are probably already beyond the threshold at which we can't move back from. We've used too much. So we cannot continue as if we have 8 planets. We have 1 planet. At the end of the day, all our consumer goods, everything, whether it's bicycles, whether it's cars, whether it's windmills, whether it's kitchens, whether it's houses, all comes down to, are all based on this very fragile thing, nature. And when the Dow breaks, catastrophe happens. And it's very thin, it's very fragile. The thing is, you probably can't see the detail about this, we're utilising all the finite resources of our planet dramatically, very, very quickly, with great acceleration. So the end point there is the early 1900s. This is where we are now. But since the 50s, since the 60s, there's been a massive acceleration in our use of finite resources. A massive acceleration in the consequences of using those finite resources in terms of soil erosion, water depletion, depletion of minerals, and all kinds of coal products. So any of that kind of stuff, ozone depletion, it's all going up. As our economy, which is based on the use of finite resources, accelerates, there's one there about financial investment, as all of that accelerates, so does the use of our finite resources. And the fact is, we've already arguably reached the limits to growth. The limits to growth was reported in 1970, produced by the Club of Rome report. So if we don't change things By 2015, we will be facing a whole range of catastrophes on this planet by 2030. Where are we now? 2017, and there hasn't been any major changes. There are a number of things where we reach the peak. Various oils and gases, minerals, we're already in decline. We've already depleted, reached the peak, and are in a stage of depletion of all these natural resources. You won't be able to read them, but these things down the bottom here are different minerals, zincs, silver, copper, all the things that makes goods. And the figures alongside are what we know as known reserves. So 90 years right down to 13. What's not on here is phosphorus, phosphates, which is one of the 3 key elements in growing plants. We only have 30 years of known phosphate reserves anywhere on this planet. We can't grow things without phosphates. We have 30 years left. The other slide, we'll look at in more detail, is water resources. Everywhere, all the major crop-producing regions of the world are under pressure from water resources. The indices here is water stress indices. Where the reds are, it shows where already we have severe problems with water. Water shortage, already droughts, but also changes, and all to do with overuse. In part agriculture, but also in part industry, and also in part housing. And because we do stupid things, like using water to remove our waste. I mean, a precious resource being used as a carrier, it's brain dead. So we have major problems already with water, which again is accelerating. Fuzzy slide, soil. This is soil degradation. Significant and dangerous degradation of soil in all the red areas, the orange areas where there are problems. Already, you would expect it in places like North Africa, Southern Africa and so on, but even in the United Kingdom and in Spain, major problems. Just as a quick aside, southern Spain has got 2 issues coming together directly as a result of our consumption of Spanish vegetables. One is water stress, the use of water for artificial fertilizer, for artificial irrigation, and the misuse of soil in terms of soil erosion. As Spain has become the exporter, the world's exporter for vegetables, so the use of those finite resources increased. So soil is a big problem, increasing problem. And the lesson, basically, soil takes a long time to make. You can't make it overnight, decades and decades and decades, but you can lose it in a year. Marginal soils in China misused, leading directly. Governments don't pay attention to this because it doesn't figure in short-term economics, but it leads directly to this. This is wind-blown soil in Beijing in 2011. Go back to the United States in the mid-30s and you're getting exactly the same kind of thing in the American Dust Bowl. Soil erosion, to do with misuse from agriculture. But we also have the same thing here. This is a field, the cereal field in southern England. This is water soil erosion. In the last 5 years. Just water running off bare soil down into the gullies, washing the soil away. So this is not just a problem for the Far East or some funny country, this is also happening here. And it's to do with our misuse of soil in agricultural production and our food system. And then there's climate change. This gets really depressing. Anyone who says, you go listen to people like Nigel Lawson on telly, tells you that climate change isn't happening, it's an artifact. Complete nonsense. The bottom line, going back thousands of years, is what we know about the climate, the temperature, the levels of carbon dioxide in the soil in this country, on our planet. The level of 1950, you can see the line, that was the level of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in 1950. Since 1950 to now, we've gone up in a virtual straight line. The figures down the side are the parts per million of carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere, which are now just below, or just around some stage, just above some stages below, 400 parts per billion. This is a level, very quickly, at which we reach a tipping point where the climate destruction happens and there's very little recall with that. We're already there. We have to do something dramatic to alter our behaviour in terms of greenhouse gas releases into the climate. If we don't deal with these things that create these fragile components, soil, water, air, upon which our planet's based, our civilization is also based on those things. And if we don't deal with this rapidly, we have a real question about what is going to happen to our society and our civilization. Scarce, finite resources under pressure. I wouldn't give much hope for a democratic system under those conditions. The haves get more and the rest of us get squeezed out. There's a real political question about this. How then do we actually manage resources to sustain civilized life on this planet? And it's the same, it doesn't matter which country we're in. This story is the same in all countries in all parts of the world. We have to reconnect with the biology and the ecology of our planet and conserve finite resources. We cannot have a growth economy that ignores the use of finite resources. We have to find a different way, a sustainable way of managing those resources. We have to have a different concept of efficiency. We have to stop trading off finite resources for some short-term productivity efficiency. We need political action. But many people don't like to go marching in the streets, don't like to take political action. So the other thing we can do, if we're not into marching down the streets with banners or whatever, is to stop acting as consumers and start to act as citizens. And this is where the food system comes in. We have to change our behaviour, not be consumers, but to have the mentality of citizens, stewards, people who actually do care about our kids and grandchildren and the world that we're leaving to. And that includes changing our food system, what we eat, where it comes from, what we do with it, how we treat it. Because the food system is really part of this overall story of global mismanagement of resources. More than a third of greenhouse gas emissions comes from the farming and food system. More than a third. There's the production of agrochemicals, transport, storage, but critically also land use change, because our patterns of consumption have changed. We destroy rainforests so that we can feed intensive pigs and poultry, so we can feed them high quality soya. We destroy rainforests so we can have palm oil in a range of processed products, including cosmetics and soaps. Brain dead. And it's not just the total carbon, it's also some significant other greenhouse gas emissions. One is methane. 30% of global methane production comes from the farming and food system, mainly from ruminant animals, mainly from intensive feedlot cattle, and also from food waste, because food waste going into landfill sites releases methane, and some to do with drainage of swamplands, wetlands, and so on. 66% of nitrous oxide, which is 310 times more powerful than carbon, comes from livestock, that comes from agricultural production in the food system. This is to do with the interaction between soil and synthetic agrochemicals. And the food processing industry uses 7 to 10 calories of fossil fuel in order to produce 1 calorie of food. Again, real problems in the food system at the heart of some of these problems, plus soil erosion, soil loss, biodiversity loss, antibiotics in livestock cattle leading to the build-up of antibiotic resistance in our medicines, and a whole range of health issues. The fact is that our farming and food system acts as if there is no limits to growth. It doesn't have to alter its way of doing things. So we have animals kept intensively in these kinds of systems, which for me is an ethical abomination. But nonetheless, this is how we do it, because we're bringing industrial practices into agriculture. So we have intensive pig and intensive pork production. We also have intensive dairy production. Most cows in many countries of the world never go outside. They don't graze in the fields. There's a sign coming across Hungerford Common saying, be careful of cow grazing. Well, you won't have a problem in most part of the world because they don't let the cows out at all to graze. They're there, indoors, in these kinds of systems. We have developed all kinds of intensive vegetable production systems, again, which are high energy usage, pay no attention to soil, water, and so on. How to change the food system is a big problem. It's not just about the techniques, the technology, it's about structures, access to land, ownership, and moving away from this drive to centralisation. One of the problems is centralised production, centralised distribution, and a move away from local systems. And this myth, complete myth, that we have an efficient farming and food system. And efficiency is measured as productivity. Efficiency is not based on management but finite resources. So anytime I talk about changing agriculture, somebody says, we need to feed the world. We're going to have 12 million people by 2030. So we can't cut back on productivity. We've got to get better, produce more and more and more. Actually, now, today, we already produce 4,600 kilocalories per person, which is enough calories to feed a population of around 14 billion people. Today, not 2050, we already have enough food on this planet now. We waste nearly a third of it. We could feed 600 million people every year on what we waste. And that's the waste before it even gets to the plates, and there's a whole other story about what we waste in the kitchen. Almost half of harvested food crops that are left are used in animal feed, which is really inefficient, and those animals are intensive pigs and poultry, or are used now as biofuels. Another brain-dead suggestion. We don't grow food to eat, we grow it to produce energy. And a significant amount is empty nutrients. We produce highly processed food which have no nutritional value whatsoever, but are full of calories. Makes you fat, makes you obese. So we don't have a food system that is about feeding the world. Now this major paradox. We have a world full of over and under and malnourished people. Everywhere in the world, even the poor countries in the world where people are obese. Because of the idea of development. Everybody wants a Western diet. Western diet means sheep protein, means animal protein. High calorie theory, high calorie food, non-nutritious, based on animal proteins and based on highly processed foods. Our global farming and food system has got very little, if anything, to do with feeding the world. So, putting that aside, what has it to do with is this. 10 companies control the global food industry. So all these brands you think are independent are actually only owned by 10 multinational companies. It's the same with seed supply. Seed supply globally controlled by 5 companies. All multinational companies. The transport of food is controlled by 2 or 3 companies, a number of them, like cargo or privately owned. Corporate control of the food system, the global food system, is a massive, massive problem. And they have developed and used a number of technologies that we find in industry and applied it to food, the just-in-time technology. So we no longer have the storage in warehouses. What we have is warehouses on wheels going up and down the motorways, bringing food to supermarkets. The consequence of that is everything has to be packaged the same size to fit in the boxes that fit into the lorries that fit on the shelves. And if the food doesn't fit that, it gets destroyed. It has to fit that system. That kind of technology and everything that goes with it runs this global food trade, make profits for those companies that's got nothing to do with feeding the world. We have a broken food system. Okay, I'll give a health warning about these next slides because they were put together by some anti-GM campaigners campaigning against genetic engineering crops in America and glyphosate. And I think in some instances they're inaccurate. But they serve a purpose here. We have a broken food system. America is the most developed of the most broken food systems in the world. This is levels of obesity in America. And you can see how high it's gone up from 1995 to 2010. From just over 15% of the US population to nearly 30%. In that short time, obesity levels have gone up. Where these figures are misused is these lines. The red line is the use of a herbicide called glyphosate, and the blue line is the use of genetic engineering on American crops. 40%, over 40% of genetic engineered crops in the world are grown in the United States. There's only 4 of them. And the use of glyphosate herbicide, Roundup herbicide, is inextricably linked with that. So what the people who brought these slides together are saying is the levels of obesity in America directly linked with those things. I don't think that's strictly accurate. I think they play a role. But what I do think is clear, so these are government figures, is the rise in obesity, and what does correlate with it are the major changes in the food system. The kinds of diets we have, how that diet's produced, and what we put into it. So the broad tendency is the case. Similarly, diabetes, linked obviously to obesity, but you get the same kind of correlation from 1980 to 2010, going from just over 5% of the American population up to over 20% in that period of time. This is all diet related. This is to do with the kind of food that we're eating, how it's produced. Death from senile dementia, same kind of curve, again, matches what has happened in the food system. And intestinal infections and a whole range of things. There's a lot of graphs like this to do with autism, reproductive disorders, and so on. Now, I don't buy into some of the stuff that the people who produce this say. I mean, correlation is not proof. But what I am clear about is that these kinds of changes in the kind of food that we have in the global food system is a major factor of the problems in our health, of which America is the example that all the rest of the world are following on. So we have a broken food system, we have too much highly processed food, with too much sugars, corn syrup, processing aids. We eat too much meat of the wrong kind, too much meat from industrial farming, for example, too much meat with a fat imbalance, the balance between omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 is completely changed. So once upon a time, we were talking about chicken being healthy. The composition of chicken now is not healthy. All of the composition of fatty acids in chicken has changed. Similarly, I'm sure you all believe that farm salmon is a wonderful, healthy crop. Forget it, it's a disaster. Its composition's changed. It doesn't match anything like natural salmon. They shouldn't even call it salmon. It's an advertising abomination to call it salmon. It's a different fish. Too many antibiotics, too many chemical residues. Between 50 and 60% of the United Kingdom's fruit and vegetables sold in the United Kingdom contain pesticide residues. A significant number contain more than one. And we've never done any work on the cocktail effect of these kinds of residues coming together. We don't eat enough fruit and veg, and we don't eat enough unprocessed or lightly processed food. So, this is why we have a broken food system, but a local food economy can change that. We can move and have a strategy that builds on local production, regional production, and appropriate national production with some kind of appropriate change. We can have ecological approaches. We can not linear approaches, not driven by technology. We can have a more local and regional system that encourages the consumption of ecologically produced fruit and vegetables. We can have less animal products, but better quality, and we can bring about major changes in our pigment culture reduction. And we can have a lower level of processing in artisanal food. Just walk outside and you can see we've got this here. There's some great stands there showing that artisanal bread production, brilliant, from local wheats, from local cereals. We've got some brilliant examples out there, so it can be done. So we can multiply that. We just have to be sensible about how we do it. Now, I've fallen into the trap here that everyone else does of just talking about one system, the food system and the farming system. In fact, it's all linked together. We have to have a combined and joint policy to do with landscape, to do with biodiversity, to do with social costs, to do with keeping people in employment. A full, comprehensive local economy. So it might be expensive, but at the moment the taxpayer picks up the bill for external costs, taking pesticides out of water, cleaning up water, soil erosion. Taxpayer pays for these things. The producer doesn't. Those global international companies certainly don't. They don't even pay their taxes. So it is already expensive. Taxpayer subsidies massively already going into farming. We need to shift that. And it's not just a subsidy for farmers. Again, we give subsidies to these massive corporate international companies. Even now, though, local food and organic food is not necessarily more expensive. It depends on sourcing, it depends on when you buy it and seasonality. But we can't, the fact is, it might be a challenge, but we can't continue as we are. We have to change. So this is where eating is a revolutionary act. Because if the government's not, and it is a big task to get the governments and the corporations to change, but we as acting as citizens can make a difference in our food choices. Organic, local ecological production, box schemes, local farm shops, farmers markets, pasture-fed livestock, marine stewardship, fish, slow food. We can make changes by making choices. Good food makes everything better. I've got some leaflets somewhere I can give you. Good food makes everything better, but it can also change the planet, which is why eating is a revolutionary act. Thank you.